She didn't tell anyone she was doing it. She listed the house on a Tuesday. By Thursday, there was an offer. By the following month, it was gone. Her daughter found out from a neighbor. Her son called furious. Her husband, her ex-husband, called too, as if he still had a say. Nobody asked why. They just asked how she could. That is the whole story, right there. Not the sale, the silence around the word why. She didn't tell anyone she was doing it. She listed the house on a Tuesday morning, alone, after a cup of tea she made for one. The way she had been making it for 3 years since the last child moved out, since the marriage ended quietly like a light being switched off in an empty room. That silence is the whole story, not the sale. The silence around the word why. This is not a story about a house. It's a story about a woman who spent 30 years being the most important person in a building. And the day she finally decided to stop maintaining a monument to everyone else's memories. And it is a story about the question nobody asked, and what that silence reveals about how we see or fail to see women over 60. Environmental psychologist Layla Scannell has spent years researching how people attach meaning to place. Her work and the broader field of environmental psychology consistently surfaces one finding. Women form deeper, more layered emotional attachments to the family home than any other demographic. This is not sentiment. It is the predictable result of proximity and labor. She was in that house. She was in it when everyone else left in the morning. She was in it when everyone returned at night and required feeding, soothing, organizing. She was in it on the sick days, the snow days, the days when a child cried for reasons no one could name. She was in it on the evenings everyone else went out and she stayed back to handle whatever needed handling. The house did not belong to the family equally. The house belonged to her, in sweat, in hours, in the 10,000 small acts of maintenance that kept it functional and warm. Which means that when she finally sold it, she wasn't selling a shared asset. She was selling her own autobiography. And nobody recognized that because nobody had been paying attention to who wrote it. Let's talk about what lived inside those walls, what she carried there that no one else carried. The Office for National Statistics estimates that unpaid household labor, cooking, cleaning, childcare, elder care, emotional management, is worth over $1 trillion annually to the UK economy alone. In the United States, comparable estimates run to several $trillion. And across every culture and income level studied, women perform the vast majority of it. In her house over 30 years, she performed it almost entirely alone. Not the visible labor, the birthday parties the family remembers fondly, the Christmas dinners that looked effortless, but the invisible infrastructure, the permission slips, the dental appointments, the negotiations with difficult neighbors, the 3 a.m. sits with a child who couldn't sleep, the management of everyone's emotional weather while her own went unobserved. Research from the University of Michigan quantified what sociologists call the mental load, the cognitive and emotional overhead of running a household. It is not merely doing tasks. It is holding in your head at all times the full operational complexity of multiple other human lives. She held that complexity for 30 years, in those specific rooms, against those specific walls. When she sold the house, she wasn't abandoning a home. She was finally, at 60, putting down something extraordinarily heavy and walking away with her hands free for the first time in 3 decades. What changed at 60? The answer is documented, physiological, and almost entirely absent from public conversation about women at this life stage. Psychologist Terry Apter, in her landmark research on women in midlife, coined the term middle-age freedom to describe a documented shift in women's psychology from their mid-50s onward. As the hormonal and social pressures of reproductive age womanhood recede, many women report a profound increase in clarity about what they want, what they tolerate, and crucially, what they are no longer willing to carry. Anthropologist Margaret Mead observed it decades earlier and called it post-menopausal zest, a surge of energy, purpose, and self-direction that many women experience after 50, that is neurologically distinct from earlier life stages. She had spent decades asking permission from her husband's preferences, her children's needs, the neighborhood's expectations, her own deeply internalized sense of what a good woman does. And somewhere around 60, that mechanism quietly broke. She looked at the house and she calculated, perhaps for the first time clearly, what it had cost her. The years of her labor preserved in its walls, the version of herself she had postponed while maintaining it, and she decided the debt had been paid in full. Her children were hurt. That is worth taking seriously. Their grief was real. But it is also worth examining factually what their grief was about. Research on adult children and parental homes, including work published in the Journal of Environmental Psychology, reveals a consistent pattern. Adult children who have left the family home often develop a powerful place attachment to it, a sense of ownership, continuity, and identity anchored in their parents' address. They visit occasionally. They keep a key. They think of it as the place they can always return to. What they do not fully reckon with is that someone has been maintaining that option for them, that the house did not hold itself in amber, that their mother, every week, kept it warm and habitable and ready for their nostalgia, without being asked, without being thanked, and without it ever occurring to anyone to ask how long she intended to do this. Their shock at her decision revealed something uncomfortable. They had not thought of it as her house. They had thought of it as the family house, which in practice meant their house, curated by her, indefinitely. She didn't owe them a permanent set. She was not the curator of their childhood. She was a person, and she acted like one. She wasn't selling bricks. This must be understood. Qualitative research on women and home transition, including studies led by gerontologist Graham Rolls on place insideness, documents the profound psychological complexity of the decision to leave a long-occupied family home. For women specifically, the move is rarely purely practical. It is a negotiation with identity, memory, and selfhood. What she was selling was the version of herself that had held everything together for everyone else for 30 years. The woman who stayed, who managed, who maintained, who was reliable because reliability was required, not because she was asked. And what she was buying with that sale was space, literal and psychological. A smaller place with no spare rooms waiting to be filled by other people's needs. A place where every decision, the color of the walls, the furniture arrangement, the daily rhythm, would be made by her, for the first time. That is not a small thing. That is, for many women of her generation, the first autonomous home they have ever had. The data on women who make self-directed housing transitions after 60 is quietly remarkable. A 2020 study published in the Journal of Aging and Health found that women who chose to downsize or relocate on their own terms, as opposed to those who moved reactively due to illness or bereavement, reported significantly higher well-being, stronger sense of personal identity, and lower rates of depression and anxiety within 2 years. She didn't disappear after she sold the house. She arrived somewhere, possibly for the first time at herself. Here is what we missed by not asking. We missed the chance to understand her as a full human being, not the keeper of our memories, not the custodian of our childhood, but a 60-year-old woman with a complete interior life and a clear-eyed sense of what she needed next. We missed the story she would have told had someone sat down and said, not "how could you," but "tell me everything." The question is simple. It costs nothing. Not, how could you sell it? But what does it feel like to finally be free? Her daughter called one more time, months after the sale. She had driven past the old house. A young couple lived there now. There were children's toys in the garden, under the apple tree, where the dog was buried, where that small stone still sat. She hadn't known about the stone. Her mother had never mentioned it. She called crying. She said, "I didn't know how much of yourself you left in that house." And her mother said gently, the way only a woman who has carried everything and finally put it down can say, "I didn't leave it there. I finally took it back." That is the emotional truth this story was always building toward. Not the sale, not the anger, not even the silence around the word why. Just a woman at 60, collecting the pieces of herself she had quietly distributed across 30 years of other people's lives, and becoming at last whole. Ask the women in your life what they are quietly walking toward. before they have to do it without you.